join our user group channel, the Splunk's Slack user group, which I didn't have a link for how to join it, but if you have problems joining it, come talk to me afterwards. But we have our own channel for this. And also, if you don't know about Splunk Slack, there are channels for everything. There's, admin, indexing, indexer clustering, whatever, upgrade issues. It's incredibly, it's a great resource. I've learned about a number of bugs or whatever that I was having at the same time, just from having this Slack. And we can all share and we can all help each other on this Slack as well. So we could go around the room. I guess I'm not going to use the thing, and we can just talk about where we're from and how we use Splunk. If we just go around the room.
Sure. Hi, I'm Manan, and I'm a Splunker. My title is a solutions engineer. I've been at Splunk for 4 years, and I love running this user group because it's hearing from people how they use Splunk and their day-to-day stories and problems. So thank you for coming out to this UG session.
Me now. Yeah, Daniel, I work for Folion. Been doing Splunk since about 2011. We're going to try the microphone again.
Yes. Guys at home, do better.
That's lovely stuff.
No mic.
No mic. I'm cool with that. So I work with 2 customers. One is Yahoo, and the other one is Verizon, a telco company. And I just try to help everywhere.
My name's Tom, working for a big tech company, doing Splunk as a service. Doing that like a number of years.
Hi, my name is Jason. I'm at the same company in a similar role. It's one there for almost 10 years.
Hey, this is Navtej. I'm at Splunk. I'm on the product side, and I'm building on observability products. So if there is anything, let me know.
Hi, I'm Li Chao. I work for GitHub in the security org. We build a lot of detections around Splunk and just try to learn knowledge from the fly. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Isaac, and well, as I told everybody, I used to be part of PayPal, where we maintain Splunk across the whole environment. So sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, but yeah. So if, I guess I'll just pass it on, sorry.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew. I'm an instructor at Splunk, so I'm a Splunker. Being an instructor, I mostly teach Splunk Core and our machine learning toolkit.
Hi, my name is Yuan. I am an ops engineer at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. We use Splunk mainly to improve our ops workflow. Like Becky, I am a Splunk Trust, mostly active answers, but also sometimes go on to Slack. So if you have any search questions, you can ask me.
Alrighty, and now I think we will do our first talk. Oh no, wait, I think there's another slide. Let's see. So I was looking at our dates, and I think we were going to have the next in person at the end of April. We have someone tentative. I need to totally confirm that, but that's kind of the plan. And I don't have any plans after that. I know we're going to skip through conf in June, and then in July we'll have a retrospective, and people can talk about what their favorite sessions were, what they got out of conf, those that went, highlights of conf. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Okay. And there we go. Now we'll hear from Pure. So,
Passing it on to John and Seamus. Do you want to share your screen?
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is John McPhee. I'm accompanied by Seamus Coyle, and we are going to talk about today how your Splunk deployment can have it all: speed, scale, and simplicity.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Seamus Coyle. I work at Pure Storage as a systems engineer in the IT department, primarily responsible for our virtualization, compute, and storage infrastructure. I've been at Pure for a bit over 5 years and can't say enough about the company and our products, so we'll get to that in a little bit here.
Thank you, Seamus. And again, my name is John McPhee. I'm the Splunk admin at Pure Storage. I have about 6+ years of experience with Splunk across Splunk Enterprise and Splunk Enterprise Security. And I handle our Splunk infrastructure for Pure Storage. And yeah, so we'll learn a little bit about that today. So first we want to talk about our use cases at Pure Storage around Splunk. So at Pure Storage, primarily we use Splunk for our security operations. Security is probably our biggest stakeholder with Splunk. And of course, they're using Splunk to build detections, alerts, dashboards, correlation searches, and they're primarily using Splunk Enterprise Security. We also have Splunk Enterprise, which is used by our application and development teams who are using Splunk for application monitoring, tracing, alerting. And then we have our IT operations that really rely on Splunk for day-to-day operations, visualizations, dashboards, auditing, user and system management on Splunk Enterprise as well. One thing that came across Pure Storage was we had our stakeholders coming to our infrastructure team and saying that they needed multiple things. So security would come and say that they need to double their ingest. Of course, there's always more use cases for security logging. There's always more data that needs to get into Splunk to build searches around. And security has high demand for a very performant system so that they can have their searches returned quickly, efficiently. They need to look back through longer periods of data, a lot of historical searches. They're running a lot of correlation searches. And so performance is really crucial there. Our application and development teams really come to us and say that they need more verbose login, right? They want to see their debug logs so that they can troubleshoot their applications or help build out the software that they're working on. However, we would prioritize our securities needs over our application and development needs if we didn't have enough resources, which has happened in the past. We've also have our IT operations that, again, really rely on Splunk to perform their day in and day out tasks, and they really rely on high availability to have the platform available at all times in order to reference their dashboards, reference any infrastructure changes that are being logged, onboarding and so forth. As the company grows, the requirements for our audits increased as well.
And we achieve this performance Splunk architecture by utilizing one of our other GTM solutions that we have with Cisco, which is called a flash stack. Basically, their UCS compute systems backed by our Pure storage system. So basically, what we're currently running is a UCS-X platform and an MDS fiber channel solution and Nexus switches for our Ethernet solution with FlashBlade using our Ethernet and Flash Array using our fiber channel. That allows us to achieve 100 gig end-to-end from the Blade chassis to either storage target and only limited by our east to west and north south network traffic for the Ethernet portions there. So we have a pretty performant environment. I've worked with members of our security team for the past 5 years and have heard nothing but their experiences with other storage vendors and comparing them to our own. They rave about the performance and just are really impressed by what we're able to put together on the back end to achieve the lowest search times and really help them do their job and get the information they're looking for. Within IT, we typically use this for various purposes. A lot of it's RCA tasks. If we have an outage or trying to correlate log events to either prove or disprove a thing happened. Oftentimes that's like a post-mortem if there was an outage, or looking at network logs to see if something was blocked so we can either stop blaming the network team or to ask them to resolve an issue that's on their end of the on their side of the fence for us.
Yeah, so we at Pure Storage, we use Splunk in many, many different ways. And so a high performant environment is very crucial to us, as it is probably many of you. So in our Splunk story, we came to what we call a fork in the road, where we had all these requirements coming in from our different stakeholders and our different end users of Splunk. And we needed to kind of determine which way were we going to go in terms of building out our deployment to meet these additional needs. Oops. So we had a couple different options. We could either, as our need for data grew, we could either add additional indexers to our deployment with additional block storage. This would also require additional CPU, additional RAM, and other resources. And so we were weighing that option. We also could migrate to Splunk Cloud and take our deployment off premise and move it to the cloud and have Splunk kind of manage all of that for us. We have high log volume, and so something we thought about. We also had a choice if we wanted to move to Splunk Smart Store on our own storage solution called FlashBlade, which is an all-flash storage solution. And ultimately, we were leading in that direction because it allowed us to separate our storage needs for our data retention from those additional resources such as CPU and RAM and engineering overhead.
Yeah, and Smart Store proved to be a really great option for us there. We were in the process of migrating to a new data center and standing up all new hardware, and this allowed us the option to do that rather than increasing our compute footprint with our aging hardware. So instead of spending money on our old gear, we were able to implement Smart Store to allow us to effectively scale up rather than scale out our, if we had to deploy new indexers, we'd have to deploy multiple of those, taking up multiple hypervisors worth of resources versus just adding new storage via Smart Store and having sort of like a hot configuration where we could easily migrate data to the indexer clusters to allow for searching while not having to deploy new hardware in order to do so. And then as a component of that, we utilized technology from Pure to migrate our object storage from FlashBlade to FlashBlade and seamlessly attach that to our Splunk footprint in the new data center and the increased performance benefits of that on the newer FlashBlade model as well.
Yeah, so staying on premise is ultimately what we decided to do, moving to Smart Store and utilizing our own storage solution to do so. Some scaling issues with classic Splunk architecture. Of course, managing block storage can be hard and time consuming. There's always unscheduled increases of data ingestion. There's always a new data source that needs to be ingested from somewhere. There's the increased management and overhead to add additional indexers, right? We would have to have infrastructure team kind of spin up infrastructure for us, get the software installed, and then manage that. And then there's also planning for multi-site growth, right? As we lean towards high availability and we want to have multi-site, there's planning for that. And I see some hands waving. Is there?
Oh, the lights turned off here.
Okay. Yeah, so these were all considerations for us as we kind of dived into transitioning to Smart Store. So some of the use cases, demands, resources, and why we chose Smart Store on FlashBlade. So we call it Splunk on Pure. FlashBlade allowed us to increase our ingest without sacrificing our search performance. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Pure Storage and the technology that we do offer all flash storage solutions that are faster than your traditional spinning disk. And even with the classic Splunk architecture, we were utilizing our own storage. We have our indexers running on a product called Flash Array, which is very high performance product. So our Splunk deployment and our end users are used to having a high performance environment. So we didn't want to have to sacrifice performance in order to move to Smart Store. And so we were able to do that by using our FlashBlade product. FlashBlade outperforms spinning disk DAS cold storage when searching over historical data. And then FlashBlade provided us easy storage scalability with non-disruptive upgrades.
Yeah, and some of the performance benefits we've seen, we can pull from our Smart Store to our indexers in excess of 8 gigabytes per second in real world scenarios. And we've seen that on our arrays. Theoretical max is probably like 12.5 gigabytes per second. So we're getting, quite a bit of that performance there. And as we increase our index or cluster, we'll likely see closer to saturation on those links. So what we see in FlashBlade is just really one of the most performant solutions. And we're utilizing our FlashBlade S series, which is our latest incarnation of the FlashBlade architecture.
Yeah, so we were able to scale Splunk while still maintaining this high performance environment we've become accustomed to. So some key takeaways for us was Smart Store allowed us to scale up with fewer scale out resources while maintaining that high performance. And as Seamus said, that freeing up the capital in order to add more CPU and more RAM allowed us to also upgrade our storage as well. And our migration to Smart Store was transparent to our users. Migrating to Smart Store from Classic was a very simple process for us. Just having that S3 remote object store set up and then applying those configurations to indexes.conf. If you're in a distributed deployment, then having in our case, our deployment server push it to our cluster manager and then pushing our cluster manager bundle out to our indexer cluster. And it was pretty seamless without any interruptions. Another benefit to that was future capacity upgrades can be dictated by storage and not by CPU, whereas traditionally you would have to scale up by adding additional indexers. Now, if we need more storage, we can just add more storage, which is big for us. Of course, being a storage company. In future storage increases will be non-disruptive because we do have non-disruptive upgrades.
Yeah, and some of the benefits we can speak to that John was briefly describing there are, we really FlashBlade S specifically provides a performance and scalable S3 compatible backend for Smart Store. Basically, the FlashBlade can be scaled up and to include extensible fabric modules, and you could basically stack, I think 3 of these currently. I'll have to, don't check my numbers there. We're kind of at the footprint where we only need 1. But basically, we have the minimum configuration of blades, which allows us to incorporate 3 more blades without doing a controller upgrade or anything like that, or adding a fabric module to increase our FlashBlade footprint and scale up. So that's a really big feature of Pure, is the performance we can achieve and the ease of upgrading. The Purity software that runs on the FlashBlade was really key to our data center migration. We had about 120 terabyte Smart Store footprint that we were able to migrate over a 10 gig link and saturate it. So it took a little bit of time, but not too much. And that's a built-in feature of Purity. So it basically allows us to create an S3 bucket and bucket replica links up to 3 FlashBlades. So we only needed 1 in this case because we were migrating to a single site. But for disaster recovery, you can actually have it cascade to 2 additional FlashBlades from the primary one. All at no additional cost is just included with Purity. And that's something that's been really advantageous to us and our plans for migrating between the data center and that particular project. Capacity and performance upgrades, like John was saying, can be non-disruptive. Pure strives to keep the same chassis for a lot of future deployments, so it's likely that future incarnations of FlashBlade controllers can be slotted directly in the same chassis and non-disruptively upgrade your physical hardware and versions of Purity, and no performance or user impact should be expected when doing those types of endeavors. And finally, Pure One Manage. I'm not sure if we have any Pure One customers here, but if we do, you basically get Pure One as a support and observability tool where you can schedule upgrades for your FlashBlades, see various statistics, create support requests in case a hardware component fails, enable things like safe mode for ransomware protection, and a number of things across your entire fleet of both flash arrays and FlashBlades. And that's been a huge tool for us. It even has a component that hooks into vCenter if you're a VMware customer and allows you to see performance at the VM level, and correlate that with performance of your volumes or buckets or storage appliances that you are currently using.
And that kind of brings us to the end of our presentation. So in a nutshell, we've had a journey moving from Splunk Classic to Splunk Smart Store. We were able to utilize our own storage solutions, which helped us maintain a high performant environment, which is crucial to all of our stakeholders. And as we grow our deployment in the future to multiple sites, the benefits of using Pure Storage or Splunk on Pure has been proven in our case to be very beneficial. Yeah, so I guess we would open the floor if there's any questions. Do we have a lot of Smart Store users in the crowd?
Lights went out again.
Those aren't the hand waves we're looking for.
I actually, in my time as a consultant, used Smart Store significantly at a couple of my clients, but due to the performance penalty of Smart Store, my current shop is not using it.
Sounds like you might need a Pure Array there, Mark.
No. We would not be a good fit for that.
Okay.
Right. I'm a little bit different in my needs than most people.
So so that was obviously that's a consideration for anybody, right? If you're moving to Smart Store and you're having your indexers act as cache storage essentially, and then you have your Smart Store location be your kind of data retention. What happens for those who are unfamiliar with Smart Store is if you run a search, um, the search will look through the buckets that are in the cache. If you have a bucket of data that is not living on your indexer in the cache, your indexer will then reach out to Smart Store to find that bucket with the data that's needed, evict bucket from your cache storage on your local indexers, and then retrieve that bucket back onto your indexers to return the results. And I'm not sure in Mark's case how their performance was, but when we migrated to Smart Store on FlashBlade, we actually did not see any kind of penalty in performance. Our searches returned very fast. There are instances where some of these configurations can be tuned in server.conf, pending Bloom filters. You can also size your local cache effectively on your indexers if needed. If you're running more historical searches, then you would probably you'd want to have more cache locally on your indexers. But in our case, we did not see any significant drop in performance.
Yeah. So how much cache do you run on the indexers?
So on our deployment currently, we have I think we have 24 terabytes of cache storage. Now
How many days? How many? Usually we track it in days as to how much you have.
Yeah, so we run enterprise security, so we try to maintain 30 days worth of cache. Now, the caveat to that is because we are running our Smart Store on high performant storage, we can have repeated downloads or even excessive downloads in some cases, where your indexer may be evicting and recaching data over and over again, without seeing a really big hit in performance.
Because your data rate transfer is as fast as it is.
Correct.
So, and you said that's 100 gig link or what?
Yeah, that's the effective rate is 100 gig because it's kind of limited by our UCS infrastructure. So we have a 100 gig port channel, or actually a 200 gig port channel to our storage systems, our storage network. The FlashBlade is connecting through Ethernet, Cisco Nexus switches, and our flash arrays serving the block storage for the indexers are connecting through a MDS switch fiber channel network. But yeah, our goal is 100 gig end to end, and we achieve that through those technologies in UCSX.
Since you mentioned UCS, I heard UCS is stopping sales. Any plans you are exploring alternatives?
I haven't heard that, not for their X gear. We have currently a solution with them. It's a go-to-market solution, FlashStack, that we kind of jointly sell. But we're not married to Cisco, or we can deploy other Cisco technologies if we want to stick within that ecosystem. We're currently an Intersight shop, so there's a high likelihood we would do that. The good thing is this performance is achievable via a number of other systems. So it's kind of system agnostic from the Pure Storage and Splunk perspective. So our compute stack doesn't matter as much as its ability to retrieve data from our performance storage systems. I think if that would be a good kind of description of it from the Splunk perspective.
What's next for you?
It's a good question. So what's next for us is we are planning a multi-site environment where we are going to have multiple sites running our Splunk deployment in case of a site failure. We're also looking into the possibility of running some of our Splunk components containerizing it and running it on Kubernetes with another Pure product called Portworx. Yeah, that's probably, the two main things that we're looking at in our roadmap. So moving to multi-site, building out our deployment, and potentially looking into containerizing as well.
Any budgets for the team when you built out your high availability architecture, your hot multi-site?
Sorry, was that for us? I don't think
Yes.
got that
Any
question.
gotchas for the team when you built out your high availability architecture?
Yeah, so with our high availability architecture, and I apologize, it was a little difficult to hear that first part of your question.
You got it, that's it.
Okay, yeah. So as we're planning our high availability deployment, some things to consider is your search affinity. And let me see if I can. You want to consider search affinity, right? If users are searching from one site to another, which site do you want to be your failover site? Another thing to consider with high availability or a multi-site environment is your search and replication factor, right? When you move to multi-site, instead of having search and replication factor, you would move to your site replication factor or site search factor, and then you would have an origin site. So there are little differences there. As far as how we're planning it out, we, aside from Splunk, we do run a multi-SIEM deployment. So we have other tools that feed into Splunk that we're also considering as part of our multi-site deployment. And then, of course, the different network zones between sites, right? We have our DMZ zone in site one, and then the redundancy between two sites, redundant load balancers, redundant. You would have to have a redundant smart store location. So if you're running smart store on site one, then you would want to have a replicated site two smart store location as well. And our FlashBlade product also makes that fairly easy because it can replicate between each other, which Seamus can probably speak on.
Yeah, via a multi-site writable bucket that we can create, which will allow you to point your smart store at both sites, I believe. I'm not as familiar with the Splunk side, but we're basically standing up the same infrastructure, so we'll be mirrored on our infrastructure level in both sites, so we can expect the same performance from both sites in case of a failure at the data center or giant earthquake, hopefully not, or something to that accord that would potentially bring a site down. So it's more for reliability of these systems.
Now, some more basic questions. Is it correct to say that the Smart Store was designed for cloud solutions, and Blade, with this FlashBlade is your in-house solution? The reason why you could say very smoothly do this migration is because you have an S3 interface, so you just apply Smart Store on your in-house solution.
Yeah, and that is correct. Smart Store was, I think, built, for the cloud, which is great, as far as running it on an on-premise solution, because, one of the reasons that we didn't want to migrate to Splunk Cloud, and just to be clear, Pure Storage does use both Splunk on-prem and Splunk Cloud today. So we do have both licenses. But one reason we did not want to migrate everything to Splunk Cloud is because we wanted to have greater control over our data. Of course, we have our own storage solutions that are accessible to us. And so, Smart Store was kind of an in-between of moving from cloud or in between cloud and on-prem, which gave us some of the benefits of Splunk Cloud while still maintaining a greater control over our data. having it on premise. And yeah, so the S3 object store, the remote object store, we set that up, and the FlashBlade device just becomes a remote object store that we can configure.
Are there any more questions? Hey, thanks for a great talk.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Look forward to the next talk.
Thanks, everyone.
We're going to take a 5 to 10 minute quick break before Daniel's talk. So stretch your legs, whatever.
Keep the lights on,
Keep the lights on, yeah.
dance a little.
Move around, keep the lights.
It's pretty. Both sides of-
Oh, I couldn't get it here.
Yeah.
Oh.
I did, yeah.
I did.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
What do you?
I'm just doing a real ass. Yeah, yeah.
I saw that it was the first time this year they're doing it.
Yeah, I got it. That's nice. I always like doing it, and you're putting it on.
We're doing a one on FinOps and I understand the cluster. Splunk to analyze, generally the storage.
That was one of the also makes sense. But it's paid for. Well, we also, in some ways, it doesn't because we ran.
I am,
It's
yeah.
just- we took that in. So you basically write tools.
They do,
Store has DC specific endpoint.
What we did, it was a little unclear, so when you register,
The other side.
just register.
Yeah.
Include a header for, shows it.
Yeah.
But it looked like if you could include the hotel costs in there, and the hotel costs were added to the registration, so they would charge you for the registration if you had bundled in the hotel. So apparently you're supposed to not do that. I had to just cancel that with the conference registration by accident. But yeah, otherwise it was, our business has been really clamping down on travel.
Yeah.
So if we weren't speaking, it would have been a lot harder to convince them.
Well, hopefully I'll get back into Splunk Trust, and so I'll have it free, but I haven't registered yet. I just occurred to me, I don't know.
Yeah.
Bytes talk.
Look into that.
They didn't say one where up.
Okay, yeah, it should be like, on that speaker resource center.
Yeah,
Like one of the steps is register for the
Yeah.
conference.
I could try it and see. if it's-
Yeah, it'll say like $0.
Yeah, I just didn't want to go
And that was like
all the pages.
Yeah,
Okay. I don't see the other one.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, in our case, it's basically we pay it twice as what we did, so. This, or.
I bet you have shorter retention.
You guys do, or?
I mean, like all default is like 30.
Oh, yeah, so yeah, in your case, yeah.
Which means-
So in our case, yeah, we're. Yeah, so we get that, right? And we have to extend it. Yeah, then in your case, you may. More storage.
Because it's API calls, right?
It's a combination. This gets. Yeah. That all sort of changes because this is all 1.0. 2.0. Then photos have changed. Yeah, so 2.0 is supposed to be. It's been used since they. Yes.
Filters.
Yeah, I mean, there are movie people, they're currently in the process of migrating stores on the back end. No, not yet. I think that's only select customers.
Yeah, they sometimes do like late night, like ghost tours.
Oh,
Like,
like Halloween.
Yeah, flashlight tours.
Yeah.
Those are usually late at night, like 7:30, 8 o'clock once the sun's down. Okay.
They do some Christmas special things too.
Alright.
I don't know if those are ton of decorations.
Decorations and all that. I'm interested in the ghost stories, so I'll probably check it out.
It's technically after hours at older adults.
If there's
much, if you have such a great view from upstairs,
Oh, yeah.
like looking at the entire building from up above.
Ah,
Is weird.
Is it?
Seeing it.
it's like weird shape and all that.
Store recognizes.
Like,
She was telling me that there was like a bunch of doors and.
yeah, there are doors, stairways that lead to nothing. It's, I don't know, think of like a 10-year-old playing The Sims or Minecraft and just kind of clumping on buildings together. Looks really disjointed, like the roof just kind of zigzags, it doesn't make much sense.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they never stopped building. And I guess Mary Winchester built it specifically for confusing ghosts in certain places.
That's interesting.
Reminds me of a hotel in Chicago. Track tourists in soccer.
Oh, really?
Oh, the Holmes.
I heard the
America's
owner.
first serial killer.
Yeah, I forgot the name, but I remember Chicago.
Like the story is so crazy. I was explaining it to I think my parents once. They're like, "Oh, what horror movie is this?" I'm like, "No, this is real." Like, oh.
So what's the story behind it? Sorry, it's like they.
It was just like the first serial killer.
Yeah, I
Built a
understand why.
hotel. People would check in. He'd have booby trap hallways, rooms, like.
Pretty much like this.
No way.
So, like dozens of kids were killed in the course of years.
Wow.
Everyone like one company to know.
At the very least, you know. Yeah, you just want to write it. You just want to RMR it, right?
That's still up and running.
And yeah, I thought
They-
it's
they-
still years and solution
I think
architects.
they initially had 6-7 years ago.
So they wanted to have us use the industry
Yeah, so I don't
words.
know.
Doing
You're-
some uncovered a new group. Like,
I mean, it works. I mean, if you draw.
Whether bodies.
luckily, no. Maybe a couple angry ghosts.
They say this.
They do that still.
Hey, every 2 minutes, we'll do this.
Oh, yeah. We're not.
Yeah, there are still rooms that have been sealed for like 100 years. There's like one of the towers spires. It's also sealed. She had to go.
2 minutes later, the light goes.
Stairs.
Yeah.
So there's no way to actually go in there anymore.
I didn't have the animation. It does it for you. I didn't have that kind of time.
I think we'll get started.
Audio check. Audio check. Guys online?
Marty's still standing up.
Good. You just got a thumbs up.
Oh, we got somebody
Like
outside
that.
still? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think as long as you stay there, no, that's this side. That speaker maybe is your.
Okay, I'm not allowed to move more than 2 feet, guys. If I walk too far, just hit me or something.
You don't usually see it going from 10 to gig. Usually I see it going the other way.
Oh. That like a different acronym, like.
They just become really efficient in the data they know they need.
You're right, I didn't even notice how high I just read 10, I thought it said 10.
We're about to learn all the secrets of
You don't need that much. You don't give Splunk all your money.
Hey, Daniel. Talk number 2, Daniel.
Oh, that's his slide.
Yeah. Okay, so can't follow that talk up. That's a little more professional than I expected, but I'll do my best here. Play a little game where you take the time of the talk you expect to do and multiply times 5, and that's how much time you give yourself to prep. So I gave myself a 20-minute talk, so I gave myself 100 minutes to make these slides. So a little time optimization. A couple people have already commented that they thought my title is backwards, and that is not backwards.
I did not say that.
Somebody noticed.
thought that.
Saw it, but that worried me.
It should worry you, worry me. But it's not a lie. I mean, maybe a little lie, a few lies in there, but not that many. So who am I? Security engineer. I don't know, coming on 14 years now, something like that. Probably been in the industry about, I mean, I'm new to the industry. I'm young and not old at all, not balding, there's no gray. But I've been around PCI, GDPR, SOC, SOC work. Right now I'm in hybrid cloud space. That's kind of where I'm spending my time. I'm not on X or any of those Twitters with all those young folks, but if you do want to stalk me, I'm on LinkedIn. As far as my Splunk background, about 12-ish years. You can see I kind of went cert heavy a few years back, and one of the few people I believe who have the, I'm told, have the Splunk Certified Architect Level 2 certification before they got rid of it.
Yeah, they just have one now.
Yeah, but these have multiple levels, and I somehow was in that little brief moment of time before they outsourced their certification program. And every now and then, Becky convinces me to come in. You don't care about any of that. So a little bit of background is I worked for eBay StubHub. They used to be one company along with PayPal back in the days, and Skype too. Splunk fell in my lap. It was outstanding. It was a great place to grow, great place to learn. I've managed 3 Splunk stacks, 2 production stacks that replicated, a dev stack, a couple development stacks, and a Splunk cloud instance. So I had huge amounts of Splunk that I had to work with. Average 100-something users every day, and our SOC team was another 20-something. When we had outages or site issues, we might have 250 people in there running queries at the same time. So you can imagine that was a large stack to maintain with a very large user base. So it was well funded. I was allowed to extensively focus on that. We went to court with Splunk with our back. We used Splunk for compliance. We arrested people with the data we pulled out of Splunk. We did investigations, international arrests, fraud detection. We had so many use cases in the Splunk infrastructure, and I was blessed to be at the center of it all. It was an outstanding job, outstanding people to work with. But eventually I just decided it was time. And went over to Folion. I heard the people were great. I had some former coworkers working there. Small shop though, small shop. They had purchased a 25 gig license for Splunk and bought all the wrong hardware. And they said, can you come in here and solve this? Why not? So I kind of learned a lot of lessons going from where I could just say I needed $10,000, $20,000 in budgets to train a team. And I could just pull from commodity hardware we had thousands of instances of in a data center to an environment that bought the wrong server and was stuck. So I really felt like when Becky was talking to me, he's like, maybe there's a talk here. Maybe there's not. One of the harder lessons I had to pick up transitioning to this second job was that really, it's really easy to over-engineer for a small shop. You can give them every best practice. You can talk to Birch here at Splunk. You can talk to all the best practices, the architects and engineers, And they can give you all the best practices, and you can over-engineer for a small shop, make Splunk unusable. You can have done everything right, Git managed, Jenkins release pipeline, version controlled every object, every single knowledge object done to best practices, and that's unusable to people new to the product. So it's really an eye-opener. I wanted to help them leapfrog to the next level, and I really couldn't. And my lessons, anybody who might come into a similar situation, is this talk. And I would argue you have two customers, you have two partners in working with Splunk. Some are chickens and some are pigs. And you got, how many people are DevOps, agile people? Okay, so I just said gibberish. So the idea is that a chicken and a pig, they walk into a diner. They say, wow, we had such good food today. We should open our own diner. We could do this. We'd make so much money. And the pig said, nah. Said, you're interested, but I'm invested. The thing is, the chicken has eggs, infinite number of eggs, but the pig dies once. So the idea is that people will start making decisions for your Splunk environment, both at the big giant company and the small companies who are not invested. Remember that when you're talking to somebody who's influencing your decisions, whether they're a chicken or a pig. And that really determines how you should respect that opinion. I have a couple other opinions at the end I'll save. But the lessons, that's gonna help you a lot, in my opinion. You're gonna have people who just, for whatever reason, they wanna tweak, they wanna put their name on there, they don't understand what's happening, they wanna change things. Focus on the pigs, the people who are committed to the outcome, not the people who are most vocal. I also learned there's a minimum cost to Splunk. When I was doing 100-something users every day and I was the primary user, and there was just a couple interested parties who helped me. My labor didn't change much in terms of maintaining, patching TAs, patching indexers, patching search heads, maintaining that infrastructure. That didn't change. In spite of the fact that I had over 100 indexers and 20 search heads at the previous gig, moving down to a stack of, eventually I got to 4, it's the same labor. Because ultimately you have that inside a script, you start to automate that kind of stuff. Testing a TA is the same. I learned that there's just this minimum overhead. It's pretty much a half-time job to maintain this Splunk infrastructure itself, regardless of size. I thought that was sort of interesting. And then training users, well, anyway, I'll dig more in here. But sort of the first culture shock I ran into going from to this, oh, you can't see me on the thing, big to little, is that documentation standards are going to be wildly different. They were wildly different in a Fortune 100. And you really need to ask and ask again, because you'll have some people say, hey, just put something on the Confluence page. That's good. Just put a few documentations in the Jira. That's great. And suddenly those are contradictory answers. Which one's the answer? Push them, because you're going to find somebody's doing it the way the executives want and the way the business gets value from, and somebody's doing it you should over document just a little. I would say give them one nudge bit more maturity than you think they need. This was something that was huge when, I'm going to jump down to my other red one, but build trust in the documentation here. What I found is that if documentation fails once out of 100 times, in someone's mind, it failed 20 times. If it's there every time, then people will trust it every time. And I discovered this at both companies where the answer would be in the documentation, but they'd still rather page you for them. They would still rather not read it. Not because they were lazy, but because they didn't have trust that that would be the current reflection of reality to begin with. So your documentation should be terse, follow standards, and always be up to date. And one of the more interesting things I'm going to talk about in a little bit with my README files, it can get bad quick if you're not careful. If you burn somebody once on bad documentation, they're burned for good. They're never going to trust your docs again. You're always going to be called at 3 in the morning. And that was something I learned. That just even missing one indexer in a Visio diagram loses trust. Now, I mentioned README files. I'm very, very particular over how README files should be formatted. And the reason why this is, I have a Python script that runs through all of my README files and all of my conf files, captures all of my documentation, and puts that directly into a web server. So that everything is automatically, the second I make a change, it's stored separately. This means as long as I follow my standard, my documentation is automatic. Second thing is I'm able to correlate all my changes across the entire stack, both at the big company and the little company, just by making sure I am moving, right? I can't be any more emotive. All right. By using a standardized date format at the beginning, just again, the standard idea, suddenly 15 comp files that changed across across your stack are easy to correlate instantly. This is a trick taught me by Splunk support. And when you do a diag, all these little inline documentations go directly to Splunk support, and they're able to grep them out immediately. So this has saved me with Splunk support as well, where we've opened tickets. They've been able to look, their system sees this, and they can actually go in there and say, hey, I can see you changed server.conf 3 weeks ago, and that's the reason 3 weeks later, your heavy forward is crashing. Super duper helpful to standardize. Although I do get yelled at by some coworkers for using the American standard. But what are you gonna do? And you'll notice I do correlate the actual change numbers and the documentations, inline documentation, to the version number in app.conf. Most of us don't bother with app.conf anyway. We just sort of let the whatever's in the TA, or we leave it blank and just let it fill itself out. Why not correlate that number back to all of your well, in this case, I do it to my history changes and README and all my documentation across the actual comp files. Makes it real easy to narrow things down. Again, same things I just sort of touched in on. Support, kind of got ahead of myself, but support gave me this idea back in 2014. Apparently it was built into their systems way back in the day. And so including inline documentation, good. Second thing, Visio, we talked about this. Don't know if everybody knows this is here, but you can get a copy of Visio on eBay for $5. You just get the old version of Visio. So I've literally sat with world-class 6-figure earning sysadmins, and they've gone, well, I can't draw a diagram. We don't have Visio licenses here. It's $5. It's $5, guys. We spent more on sodas here, we drunk right here in this conversation. Visio, draw what you're doing. They provide gorgeous stencils on Splunk.com. They work with OmniGraph and Draw.io too. What do they say? Pictures worth 1,000 words. So again, a big corporation had hundreds of copies of Visio. Little company didn't, but $5 later, we was good. Educating the team. This was an eye-opener for me. I have to admit I made a mistake. When I was dealing with hundreds of people at a time, what did I do? I reached out to my sales engineers, my sales team. I need X amount of educational credits, 40, 50, whatever it was at the time. And I would divvy them out to the various scrum masters. And I would say, make sure your team gets this training, and they would get that training, and inevitably they would. And the training was the signature that we added them access to Splunk, and we were off. And that's how I had to handle Splunk at scale when I was the only Splunk person for, again, I could peak at 200 people during an outage. I was the only person. So that's how I had to be. And that's sort of with the mentality I came into the smaller company with, hey, let's get some educational credits, a couple of SplunkConf tickets, and these guys will all be spun up. That didn't work. It didn't work at all. It was a mistake. The reality is, if people don't immediately, especially in smaller business where people were going to wear a lot more hats, immediately get an opportunity to take what they learned in that 4-day boot camp, the 3-day boot camp at SplunkConf plus 2 to 3 days of talks, right? They don't immediately get back to their desk and have an opportunity to apply that in the real world for 3, 4, 5 weeks and get that experience alongside an expert. That information goes out the door. How many of us will watch the documentary on Netflix and don't remember half of it a week later? It's worse than that because well, SPL is hard. That's the other thing I learned. Having done it for so long at eBay StubHub and working with data engineers and working with programmers, these people are experts in query language. Picking up SPL was trivial. It's just a change on doing things. But when I was working with security engineers who were more incident response, compliance response oriented, SPL was some of these people's first touch of a query language beyond, select whatever from the little basics they learned when they started out. So I was surprised that even these world-class, incredibly intelligent people, graduates from some of the best schools, really didn't have a lot of query language experience. So SPL was a much larger learning curve when I left that environment than I really thought it was. So you did search and reporting 1 and 2, you're good, they're not good. You need to get them in their hands-on with experts. Final thing I do that really close some gaps, this smaller company in particular, big one this work too, but I do not, it's not to be rude, but I don't usually take direct questions about how to do a thing. Not that I don't know stats, count by, use T-stats, let's go ahead and do this lookup table. Not trying to be rude. But 2 things have to happen, especially in a bigger environment. You can't be the only person answering these questions when you have 200 users coming to you. That's an unsustainable funnel. And in a smaller company where I need that knowledge to disseminate faster, I can't do it for you. So that there's 2 things. It's not, again, not that I'm trying to be rude, but I do ask that they go into the community Slack or on the Splunk answers. Ask the question that I am asking from you to me using this tool. Often they're going to get a more thorough answer, faster answer, especially if I'm not available, an answer that doesn't interrupt someone else's work. And then finally, it's usually by the time you teach them to use Splunk answers, start to ask questions, they also learn to search it. And they stop asking those questions. And then they don't lean on you as hard. And I would say that's been invaluable in both companies. Finally, if they're not curious, it's just not going to work out. I worked the stock at the previous gig, 20-something people. I'd say half of those people were curious and they got into Splunk. They did amazing things, stuff that I still can't replicate. And there's half who didn't. And those people aren't really in the industry anymore. And if they're not curious, you can't force them to get curious. But you're gonna find somebody who's got those eyes are gonna light up and go, oh, once they see correlated searches and lookups, and once they start seeing data models, they're gonna get it. The people who don't have an ounce of curiosity and just want to move to the next. That's different. See a chat. Am I doing something wrong?
I think that was just in the beginning.
Okay,
You
okay.
made a comment, how did you go downsize that?
Wasn't that I dumped, I moved jobs.
Yeah.
Support is challenging. You know, when you're a smaller company, and I'm not trying to say anything negative to Splunk or anything like that, but I love Splunk, here I am. I'm not saying anything negative, this is me stomping my feet. But my sales team was changed on me 6 or 7 times in the last 4 years. They don't know my name, I couldn't pick them out. I couldn't pick them out of a lineup of 3, you know what I mean? That's just the reality of being a small customer. It's just how it is. They can't make a living off of us, so they have to have 10 or 11 other customers. I get it. So do I. You don't get those designated technical support. When I was working for eBay StubHub, I can call 1-800-SPLUNK, and the same person picked up the phone who was heavily educated in my environment. And don't get that anymore. It's not even a pragmatic option. So you have to learn to work with your support people a little more clearly. You have to include every bit of documentation possible. You have to preempt. So my tickets to Splunk always include the same, maybe 2 pages of documentation that I have maintained. Oh my God. It's the same 2 pages of documentation that I always keep maintained in my conflicts. So when I open a ticket, I include a diagram, recent change history, change control history, version numbers, server numbers, support. All that information is always in there every time. Because then you're going to get a new person every time who doesn't know, you're going to ask those questions, and it's not fair to Splunk, it's not fair to us to go back and forth 50 times. So do keep that documentation ready to go for Splunk support, as well as those inline documentations I mentioned before. And finally, make the extra effort to know Becky, know you guys, come to these events, hang out in Splunk Slack, and you're going to be able to close the support gap a lot of ways that way. Because you might run into somebody from GitHub I want to talk to later.
I like your last bullet. Effort to sync with your sales team. It'll pay off.
I've never not had a good working relationship with my sales engineers and sales staff. Splunk has always been supportive. Again, as a smaller company, I get rotated faster than I would if I were eBay StubHub, but
still got to maintain that.
Correct. It's been outstanding. Did you know this new feature? Hey, by the way, we have this new service. Every now and then Splunk will release a new service, like we'll audit your environment. Hey, by the way, we're updating our costs. I can get you this much off. That'll make it worth it for you to buy your license in June instead of August. Thanks for the heads up, because otherwise I would have had to buy in August and would have paid X dollars more. Those sort of conversations can save you money. Also, oh man, when the sales team emails support to move something faster, it moves. You guys have magic in the back end. I don't know what's going on.
Sometimes, not all.
I don't look like magic to me, like, please
Cool.
fix this, they ask me the same crazy question, can't quite get it moving. Hey, could you, yeah, no problem. 3 emails later, I have an answer. Here's the patches coming out in Splunk 9.21, okay. But yeah, it always pays off. I've never had a 30-minute conversation with your sales guy not pay dividends.
Thank you for recognizing that.
That's why I said I like it.
It's worth your time, worth your time. Some people, they don't want to talk to them because, oh, they're trying to sell me stuff. Well, and you're just trying to buy stuff, so that's not the issue here, is it? I got my Zoom window in the place. Again, this is just a hodgepodge circa what a purchase presentations, but I hear people change the default ports on Splunk all the time. It's not worth it. It's security through obscurity. And do you know how often you open a ticket with Splunk or introduce someone new to the product as the administrator, and you say, oh, that's not 9997 here, that's 11182. Well, now every piece of documentation they read on Splunk.com is useless. ChatGPT can't help them. Support is confused when they look at the configurations. Unless you have a really, really good reason, security through obscurity is not the answer. You're going to create more risk with the administrative side and the incident side, and then it's worth it. I had a previous manager who insisted everything get changed, and we could turn a 30-minute ticket to Splunk into 2 days just by ports being wacky and them going, I don't know what's going on, and they escalate, and now you're stuck in a loop of problems. I've had then people who come in to support me mentally flip 2 ports around, and now we have an outage in Splunk. It's just never been worth it in my experience, and I've absolutely seen Splunk talks say, you must do this. I think you bridge a lot of those conversations by also making partnerships with your firewall engineer. Make sure they document things inside the firewall the same way you document them in your Splunk environment. This has helped me at Fortune 100s and little tiny corner company. It's if you use the same language and the same verbiage and the same, I don't know, I want to say PEP 8, but PEP 8 style naming conventions, you're going to save yourself so much troubleshooting time. And that deployment server, you guys watch that talk. Who did that talk a few years ago? Honing Splunk through deployment server. I think it was Black Hills did it. Pen testing company managed to get inside a deployment server and owned like 4 data centers within an hour. And they had full administrative root rights. They had taken down the entire environment, exfiltrated data. They had a 1-week engagement and solved it in 4 hours. And it was all because the Splunk deployment server got popped. So your Splunk deployment server, as much as you want to protect your search head and your indexers, your Splunk deployment server, that's your gold. And I'm stomping my feet here when I say you can have pen testers maybe possibly take that deployment server. Not saying it happened to me at the previous job, but a guy like me at a previous job may have had that problem. And of course, disable 8089 Unite. One thing I learned in a little company, because they bought the wrong hardware, moving from a standalone instance to a cluster is just not a thing. It's just not a thing in Splunk's world. They're like, just build the clusters separately and then leave them in parallel till the data ages out. It's so even if you do cluster of 1, if you Google Splunk cluster, oh, there it is right there on my things. Google Splunk cluster of 1, there's a way to set up 1 indexer as a cluster. It'll just say, by the way, my cluster cousins are missing. Oh, well, and you'll be able to use it normally. Then later, when you add the clustered elements, you're good. But you migrating from a true standalone is almost always dev, guys. It's just dev. That's all standalone should ever be used for. Huge mistake in the little company. I mentioned they bought their own hardware a few times. Yeah. When you're choosing hardware, make sure it's something you can get a year later, because they could not get the same super micro drives. They should have called Pure, right? But they couldn't get the exact same Supermicro had released a special proprietary interface for their M2 drives. Could not buy hard drives a year later. That's a huge investment for a small company just starting with Splunk to have to abandon the whole hardware. I think that was a $40,000 server they had to go, oh, well, write it off. That's a lot for a company trying to decide whether Splunk is in their future or not. And of course, a dedicated box to do all your admin work. Your Splunk environment should only accept administrative work from one IP address. You should have a break glass, don't get me wrong, but you want to keep the bad guys out. They should set your system up, all your local firewall rules, all your firewall rules up, so that, boom, only this one dedicated box can get in. You've just improved your Splunk security an infinite amount of times. I'm not saying a very qualified pen tester ruined my day a few years ago, but I will say a guy like me a few years ago had that problem. Shamelessly stolen from Berkshire. Configuration files, you notice that that little indent I do on your index? I leave everything left aligned that the computers did. Anything I do in my Splunk environments have a 2 indent. So if you're support, you're going around and you're wondering like what changes got made by a human being, what change got made by a human being in this config file? I changed the index. Very obvious. Now right now you're laughing and saying, okay, this is obvious, Daniel. Now 3,000 lines of comp files. How big are your tags you're sending into support? You just saved somebody a lot of trouble. I made a mistake of going straight to Git and Jenkins with the smaller company. I had all this at the other company. We had Jenkins pipelines with Jenkins slaves going on, multiple Git installations. Everything was auto version controlled. We had a rollback feature. We had all of those super cool things you want in your Splunk environment. Some of it was containerized, half of it would go to the cloud. We load balanced, blue-redded our Splunk environments across environments. We could release half here, then cluster sync later. We destroyed our heavy forwarders and ephemerally destroyed them. It's great. The company doesn't need that. Don't try and leapfrog beyond their abilities. Understand what they can do, because my attempt to leapfrog very smart people, I read the room. Wow, this guy's a smart guy. He's smarter than me. That doesn't mean he has the experience I have. Those are 2 different things. I'm dumb as a brick, but I have experience with Splunk. This guy's super smart, but he didn't have experience with Splunk, and we were talking about Splunk. And I kind of mistook intelligent groups for people with experience with what I was doing. So moving them straight to Git release, version control, Jenkins managed Splunk infrastructure meant they could not use Splunk. Hey, just copy your search at savesearches.com, save it in there, update your app.com version, put it in inline documentation, Git committed, roll it out to Jenkins, deploy it, and then A/B test it. What's so hard about that? See the problem? Works great in enterprise when I have 200 people, I didn't have a choice. Now that I have to move fast and help take care of people, all I did was make Splunk hard for them. Give me the GUI. I can go back in there myself. I ended up writing a series of Python tools that would go in there and check for SPL mistakes, missing indexes, typos, jobs. Of course, Admin Ninja's app help checks for that kind of stuff too, and properly set permissions. I just made the tools for the mistakes I knew they were going to make, and I would just go into var log messages and grab the results of the Python script that ran every hour. And I go, oh, hey, by the way, we forgot. And weeks and weeks of work getting that Git managed, I just ripped it out. Once I got them on the GUI, we were productive. We were adding value that the business actually wanted. Then a year later, 18 months later, when they started to understand Splunk, I slowly introduced version control. I slowly brought the maturity of the organization up. I see this mistake made by professional services as well at Splunk, where they do want to try and leapfrog a team. They want to leapfrog a team, but you got to listen to the actual room. And I made that mistake. What about syslog? This is oh my God, sorry. Especially with an organization just coming to Splunk, just send it all to syslog. People who are Linux guys, graybeards, all they want is to grep. Let them grep. Everybody, the rest of us will be fine. There's also this tendency to do the opposite, which is dump everything in Splunk, and that's useless too. Teaching people that garbage data, that Splunk is not your syslog server, is critical. Because Splunk's a very expensive place to put data that's adding no value, that is stored just in case. Get rid of it. Splunk is amazing at finding needles in haystacks. Splunk is terrible at managing haystacks. So we want to get that haystack as small as possible so we can find the needles. And so let's focus on your use cases. What do you want? I want to ingest var log secure. Okay, what do you want? I want to watch authentication. That's very different. It's very different. One of those has business value. One of those is 8 logs, 8 lines. But the other one was millions of lines and it's just a file. One of those cost me about $0.05 a month in Splunk licensing. The other one cost me thousands of dollars a year. Because they wanted to solve it with give me var log secure and not understand the use case. Kind of moving on, just again, little trick I do. I probably almost took this slide out, but I hit my rule. I hit 90 minutes. But basically, Splunk works in a reverse lexiconical way. I highly, highly recommend you create a Z Global app to pre-configure all of your Splunk instances, everything from forwarders to heavy forwarders to indexers to search heads to whatever you're doing with Splunk. Z Global should have all of your defaults. Splunk works backwards. I don't know if you see the bottom where I have a field called hello created in props.conf. What is the user experience? What's the final result of those two conflicts? The answer is the one on the right, ACDC, because Splunk will look at the ZZ top, apply that, then it'll go to XXX, YYY, work its way all the way up to A, and apply things. So if you use a Z Global app where you set your server defaults, your security defaults, your banner, your logon, turn off ports you don't need, turn off the GUI, make sure that your indexes are compressing the way you compress. Talk to your storage guy. You put that in Z Global, and then if you have exceptions, you put the exception in there. This makes your configurations a lot smaller and more consistent. It's also good to know this just for eventually you will run into 2 TAs that trip over each other, and this is going to be the result. If you are using LDAP, switch to LDAP S now. If you are using LDAP, I suggest everyone go online tonight and change. I'm not saying that I got a red team pen tester, got into our Splunk environment and did bad things a few years back, but I'm saying a guy much like me had an experience where all they had to do was turn on TCP dump and capture the passwords of VIPs because Splunk authentication was going over old LDAP protocol. Splunk shouldn't support LDAP. I didn't know any better at the time. I was still a junior security engineer. Splunk should remove LDAP support, but it's around. And a lot of you are using it, and that means you're sending your executives credentials in clear text across your network. So let's move to LDAP secure, or better yet, move up to SSO. SSO is great for those of us using search head clusters because you can reboot, you can actually reboot instances. Users will magically get moved to the next instances. They never know Splunk went down. Beautiful, beautiful seamless integration. And then finally, just because it's no better place to put it, match your roles. Oh yeah, John knows what's up. Match your permissions to your org chart as much as possible. So you're gonna have this urge to create something called ad hoc groups. Becky and Daniel get access to this index. Why? Why? Why is it Becky and Daniel? What is our correlation in the business? Oh, it turns out we're both in the security org. Wouldn't you be better off with a security OU for that and questioning whether other people in that group need access as well? This isn't just for Splunk, but 5 years from now of ad hoc groups, you're gonna have, I'm not saying this happened to a previous person, to me, but there was this guy a few years back who was working with an Active Directory team. They had about 150 users in their Active Directory. They had about 400 groups in Active Directory. How do you have more groups than you do people? And how do you explain that to your explain that to your auditors? If you stick to your org chart as your source of truth for access, you're going to eliminate that scope creep. I'm kind of getting to the end of my talk here. Save money. Don't ingest what you don't need. Collect what matters. Use metrics if you can, but recognize metrics are very, very hard the way Splunk does them. Users don't get metrics. They're barely getting the logs. Then you're asking them to learn data models. Then you're asking them to learn lookup tables. Now you're expecting them to learn metrics, which has a completely different query language in Splunk than the rest of Splunk. So careful with metrics. They are the answer, but since Splunk does them in a weird way, well, I don't say weird way, contradictory way to the rest of the system, you may need to be aware there's a learning curve there. So I've left things as logs that I know I should have kept as metrics because I know the users can't understand it. It'll be a learning curve for them. I opened up by talking that chicken and the pig story. The chicken and the pig story leads to what's called the 8 wastes or downtime. This is another agile DevSecOps philosophy. If you're a DevSecOps person, you live and breathe these 8 statements. These are the philosophical questions that sort of lead the chicken and the pig style. Good call. When you're solving things, you're having to make these compromises from this Splunk Lantern perfect implementation of Splunk, where I have literally millions and millions of dollars of budget and backing of CEOs and directors, to this environment where they're still not sure they want to continue it when a review comes up, that people are still having some learning curve challenges. When you start to make those sacrifices, these are the 8 things that run through your head, my head, probably run through a lot of DevSecOps people. Customer isn't happy, you failed. Standards are great, but are you overdoing? Are you doing too much? It's overproduction, waiting. If they have to wait for me, wait for you, wait for this person, wait for this person, wait for that person, you failed. Use their talent. If you got smart people in the room, train them, give them the access, restrict their roles down, give them runbooks, give them scripts, leverage the talent of the people asking questions rather than be the guy all the time. Don't move between tooling. Don't have them go between 6 dashboards, Splunk, a syslog server, an expose. We know this, right? If we keep everything in Splunk, we can reduce their complexity. Inventory, logs and metrics without use case are just junk. They're just garbage. If you don't have a use case tied to that data, you're just, I mean, sure, Splunk's bottom line appreciates you, but you've made Splunk harder to use. Motion, if it takes multiple people to get something done, you're probably making a mistake. We need to strict it down, especially we're talking about small businesses here. They don't have that many people. They got 6 people. They got 5 people who need to do this. Now, if you're a team of 200 engineers, you have to solve these differently. And then extra processes. Doing too much, having an overly complex change control process or process to get things done is every bit as bad as not having a change control process. You could bring a world-class change control process to a small business and that'll put them out of business. Won't save them anything. Just because it's best practice doesn't mean it's the best practice for you now at that moment. Notice that they grow. When you bring Splunk in at the beginning, then you bring 12 months later, 12 months later, 12 months later, you're looking at 3 different companies in their maturity with Splunk. Then you can introduce all the fun stuff. Then you can introduce pipeline. Then you can introduce version control. Then you can talk about bringing in metrics. Then you can talk about data models. If you try and do it all at once and leapfrog them too far, it's just too much. Anyhow, that's my overall take. This is a blank slide. I thought it would impress you guys. Ingest actions, yeah, we have a null queue set up. Am I allowed to say Cribble here? Cribble. It's just off the chat.
No, it's all good.
It's a user group.
It's a user group, I can be more honest. Cribble's great, null queues are great, ingest actions are great. Dump it all. I haven't played with Splunk Edge Processor. We're on-prem, isn't that cloud only still? Cloud only still?
Control.
It is. We had a demo for it. They say that it's probably going to come to on-prem, but we haven't seen that yet. So
Most of what I'm doing, myinputs.com and props.com are inclusive. I'm sorry, they're exclusive instead of inclusive. That is, I only bring in the things that match my regex, as opposed to dump what matches my regex. That ensures I always get what I wanted for the use case. One of the first things I do is grab the log sample, put it in ChatGPT, give me the regular expression for this, tweak it so it always makes a mistake, and that is my inverse null queue. If it doesn't match this, I dump it. So like I mentioned that varlog secure, I just have the authentications in. Then someone says, well, I need this out of varlog secure, then I add that regular expression. So by inverting the logic, you can get only what you need.
Is there
One point
consideration
from
for
a-
moving to cloud? at all instead of being on-prem in a small environment?
I love, my personal experience with Splunk Cloud has been negative. The support is just not there. That said, support isn't the end of the world, isn't the only factor you would factor in, right? If it takes a day to get something done, sometimes that's fine. The second issue I have is that we're not going to Splunk Cloud is that our heavy lifting has nothing to do with the things that Splunk Cloud provides. It's the data onboarding, the user education, setting up the universal forwarders, managing the syslog servers, managing the Kubernetes infrastructure, educating our users. Managing an indexer and a search head cluster, they're pretty trivial once you have your scripts in place. And we can actually get storage costs down. Maybe we should talk to the Pure guys, get some better numbers. But for our indexers, we had some nice ones with 60 terabytes of M2 installed on them. And they're cheap enough, they're commodity, I can buy 1,000 of them. And that allows me to have 2 years of hot data without having to archive. And the prices of that on Splunk Cloud are just, our entire budget wouldn't last a month. So having that on premise is critical for us, just on that 2 years hot available requirement from our SEC requirements.
You're not up to 30-month requirement yet?
What's that?
30-month retention requirement out of M2131. I'm surprised it hasn't hit you as well.
We were told 24 months hot, 6 years available within 24 hours. Those are our guidance.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a White House memorandum. It applies to all federal contractors and agencies called M2131 that dictates it's all about logging. And the retention requirement out of it is 30 months, what they call warm, which basically means you can live search. So what Splunk calls hot, warm, and cold.
Yeah.
And they have a longer retention for what they call cold, which is what Splunk would call frozen.
We're not a publicly traded hedge fund. So we're
Yeah,
just
no, this is, I'm at a federal contractor, national lab. So that's why I have to be so familiar with this.
Gotcha. That's tougher. Right? Do you do cloud or are you totally on?
No, we do not have authority to operate for cloud. So we have to be on-prem. So any kind of cloud service we use, it's a roughly 3-month process to get permission to use it. And that's if it's an easy one. One thing I actually wanted to throw out there, you mentioned the more groups than humans as a danger sign for you. I actually have the opposite view, wearing a compliance hat. If I see more humans than groups, that's almost always an indicator that groups are being reused in ways they shouldn't.
There's a battle between least privilege and manageability of the risk. And
oh yeah,
that's complex. There's not one size fits all, but I definitely am definitely been on both sides of the audit, and it's challenging. It's challenging, but usually simplicity is the answer.
Yeah, it's just I've had too many times where people create a single group, and then because this group has 75% of the people they want, they reuse that group for 3 other things, and then not realizing that's a different 75% of the people who belong in the group each time.
Kind of digging an infosec theory, but this is actually something we're currently, always going to battle. People are, but one of the arguments that I make frequently when I run into this problem is this a problem with your group or is this a problem with your org chart? Are you including HR in your decisions here? And what I usually find is that it's IT teams who don't have a venue to talk back to their HR teams and develop an org chart that actually is correct. If an IT team discovers that this org chart doesn't reflect the supervisors or division of labor, well, it's an HR problem. It's not an AD group issue. And so that tighter integration is either seen as valuable or impossible to some organizations, right?
I shouldn't laugh, but yep, I'm very familiar with the problem that you're talking about. We are adding some new group software that is resulting in a factorial explosion in our number of groups.
Are there other questions for Dan?
I have a comment and a question.
Oh my God.
But before that, I want to say this is a very inspiring talk. I remember you gave a smaller portion of this talk on Zoom, and that was a great discussion too. So yeah, my comment is about your saying that make people go to answers to Slack, and that actually has benefited me greatly. I started using Splunk in 2014, and the guy in my company actually took that route, and more or less, he was extremely helpful. He actually worked for Splunk for many years after that. And he, after I bugged him again and again, he said, okay, well, yeah, there's a community, work with them. And I went, and now I am able to answer, not only answer questions, but I actually give document references in my answers. So I got that familiar with this whole search language and thing. So that was a huge benefit for me as a learner. Right? So my question is, can you elaborate a little bit about what's wrong with your initial hardware? Is it just because a year later you can get the hardware, or is there something else? Because I am at a point where I may commit this same mistake.
So when I say there's something wrong with it, I guess I exaggerate a little, and I'm trying not to blame the possible coworker who might be on the Zoom. But what happened was they bought perhaps the most powerful box they could. They dropped tens of thousands. I think I remember them telling me it was a $50,000, $60,000 box. They went because they didn't understand clustering and horizontal scale. They looked at the Splunk spec and they bought a gorgeous server was the problem. So this is circa 2020. Don't quote me on that. So they dropped 60 grand, got all these proprietary Supermicro M2 drives. They decked it out because again, they just didn't have that fundamental knowledge of scaling horizontally. And when it was time, eventually there's sort of this peak with Splunk. If you're using data models, it's, from me, my experience, it's about 100 gigs per day. For not data models, it's usually more like 300 gigs per day per indexer, where regardless how much power you have in the box, you start to get diminishing returns, and horizontal is a superior direction to go. That's why the ES standard says 120 gigs or whatever it says nowadays, because ES is so dependent on data models. But the problem was we had some drives fail and we wanted to scale horizontally. Well, they're like, well, how many do you need? Well, we want an index cluster requires at least three indexers. Let's get 4. At 60 grand a pop? No, we're not doing that. That's more than a Mercedes. But I was like, no, we're gonna switch to, at the time, I don't know how many processors, don't quote me, but at the time it was like 36 processors, 256 gigs of RAM, and like 60 terabytes of proprietary M2 drives, which is cheaper now than it was in 2020, but at the time that was way over the top. I'm like, no, we need something like 18 to 24 cores. Let's take it down to 64 to 128 gigs of RAM. And I'm fine with M2 drives, although I'm sure I'm getting looks right now from the Pure guys. And it was the challenge of actually telling them that you overbought, and that was a cultural challenge. Like, you actually bought too good, and you put yourself in a position where you can't replicate horizontally. I can give you a 36 core and a 24 core and a 24 core. Like, you index cluster that, you're gonna end up with some weird results. You should have comparable hardware in the same class, and telling them that that server was effectively not useful for their next generation Splunk when they had to emotionally commit to such a high purchase was challenging, and not entirely sure looking back I handled it as well as I could have. I know they needed to move to an index cluster. I know that that's the correct answer. But me coming in and not understanding the culture behind the overpurchase is definitely a challenge, where I didn't ask the right questions and make sure that I didn't make sure someone's feelings got hurt, and make sure some budget guy who probably had to work, yeah, this is worth it. Splunk's gonna be worth it. And then, we hired a Splunk expert, told us we did it wrong. That's, I may have said it in a way I shouldn't have, and, we're all growing.
What I really heard is throughout everything else, know your audience, know who you're serving.
Mm.
And tailor your knowledge to them until you can move them to where they need to be. I think that is probably what I took from everything you spoke about.
Very much so. And know that they're growing. Like, I think that's the part that people think, oh, you're removing Git managed stuff, you're doing this, stuff. No, I'm saying that for now, while we're learning, why not make it easy? And then a year from now, we'll revisit the conversation. And I think that's what do they call it? Prepare, discover, advocate, close, and support. That matters to the sales pipeline. I used to set up CRM software professionally.
Okay.
But you prepare, right? Like you're saying, prepare. Did I listen to my audience, and did I discover what they needed, and then actually advocate for the correct solution and goals? And I wouldn't say I always did that right, but I did. It's a challenge. We're always getting better. But yeah, know your audience. Know your audience. Prepare and discover.
When you talked about the documentation earlier, one of the things that I noticed is you didn't go into the areas of documentation that I often find most important and least often present.
Mm-hmm.
The underlying assumptions of the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about, yes, our assumption is we expect this kind of availability, this kind of culture. I try and make sure that I add that kind of notes to my documentation as the core key assumptions of the overall infrastructure, so that 6 months later, if someone comes along and says, why in the world are you doing it this way? We can point to that and we can decide, is this still true?
That's a really good observation. And what I actually do is something, I don't know how many of you guys are into like CISSP and all those little how-to certifications, but there's actually something called the capability maturity model, which is a model that describes the 5 being world-class Netflix, 1 being the 3 guys in their garage. When I deployed Splunk at StubHub, by the time it reached its apex, it was a 4 or a 5. Like, it was the model that Splunk wants you to use at the time with all the latest do models. So when I try to bring that 4 or 5 level capability, that cultural capability maturity to Volion, and I tried to get them to a 3, it was overwhelming. They could not do that. They needed a 1 and then become a 2, and then become a 3. So when you're talking about, this is where I'm interpreting what you're saying, please cut me off, I'm misinterpreting him. But when you make that documentation, say, I'm going to aim for a 1 or a 2 right now, and we're going to try and become a 3 in a year. And that's kind of you can refer to the growth strategy.
It also included some of the nitpicky little details of, we did this app this way because of this underlying code reason in the application we're supporting. The classic example of, this server is online because the application pings this server, and if the server goes down, it goes down an old code path that is broken and it will kill the application. So even though the server has no application running on it, it has to stay up at all times.
Okay, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm gonna tell a quick story. We had a couple ornery developers in the previous gig, and we used to have this log line that started coming in and said, this error is not my fault. Please stop sending the JIRA to me. And so one day I came in, I noticed their license was up like 15 gigs. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And so I just popped in there and our logs were just full of this. I am not responsible. Stop blaming me. So in your example, I had to put a null queue in place. And then I did cite that, like you're saying, that weird dependency on the environment. I'm sorry, I'd forgotten all about that. So you mentioned.
I think that's a great idea, Mark, because I know in my own workplace, there are some odd things, and I like I've been there long enough now that I wish that I had documented, like, why did we make that decision? And I'm like searching Slack. I know there was a reason. And I'm the one that's likely to remember it. And if I can't remember it, no one is. So that's a great idea.
Do you put your documentation in, and this is for Mark and you, do you put your documentation in line in a README file with apps? Or is it a separate repository like Confluence, that kind of thing?
I put it in Confluence because I actually have a requirement that to make the documentation available to persons who do not have access to the app. And part of what I'm required to document is the user level documentation and the auditor level documentation. And I don't want to give them OS level access if I can avoid it. I have this requirement called SA5. Which is a NIST citation for those of you who don't recognize it, which basically means write the fine manual, including how to harden and secure the box.
Oh, it's just coming back to me. Were you the one who gave the talk not
Yes.
too long ago on documentation? Yes. I was trying to find your talk and cite it in the presentation, and I ran into my 90-minute limit.
Okay. It should have gotten sent out.
I missed it. Yeah. Go back and watch his talk. It's
Right.
really good.
Yeah, last December. Well, this was very interesting. We should thank Daniel. For those that are here, I do have a little bit of swag. I have so much swag at my house for Splunk stuff. So that just it's like a hodgepodge of things. Odd, one size of each t-shirt, if people want to get it. A Splunk bag, a few socks, and a couple of Splunk hats.
Look, I would take a Splunk hat. Nobody else is cutting you
Oh,
off.
there you go.
Whoa.
Call dibs on it.
So anyways, just come up and get it because believe me, our spare bedroom is like during COVID, they sent us a box that was like